Amen. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us again. I realize it's Friday morning and everybody's still waking up, so you're welcome to have even more coffee as all of our colleagues work their way in. But we're so pleased to move on to the second day of the conference, The People of the Shining Mountains, the legal past, present, and future of the Ute tribes. Yesterday, for those of you who were here, we had some really wonderful presentations that set the foundation on the legal history, including the treaty history of the Ute tribes, as well as some great information on the natural resources and political situation of the tribes, both in Colorado and in Utah. We're very much honored to have tribal leaders and lawyers and many of my colleagues and students here with us. Today we'll move on to even deeper consideration of some of the topics that were alluded to yesterday. And so the panels will look at the religion and culture of the tribes as they implicate legal issues, as well as water rights of the tribes and institution building for the future. We'll have a wonderful keynote address at lunch by John Echohawk and some other great events today as well. And so I want to turn this first panel over to my colleague from the Religion Department, Greg Johnson. And I should say, too, and this was apparent yesterday, that Indian law is pretty much always an interdisciplinary endeavor. It's hardly ever just the law. And when I teach Indian law, not only am I teaching tax and natural resources and all sorts of things, but also looking at issues through the lens of history and culture and linguistics and religion. And so I think some of the panels today will make that clear and hopefully inspire ongoing, rich discussions. And so I will turn it over to Greg, and thank you very much.
Sure, absolutely. All right, well, good morning. Clearly, we have people still coming in, so I'll take a few minutes and introduce the topic a little bit while we're waiting on others. So this is the session on language, religion, and culture, and it promises to be absolutely wonderful. We have Alden Naranjo, Steve Moore, and Peter Ortego, just an all-star lineup here. I'll introduce each in turn when we get to them in greater detail. I'm going to introduce things by just saying a word about what it was like for me as a graduate student to attempt to study Ute religion. We're next month on the 20th cusp of the 20th anniversary of my near failure to write anything coherent at all about Ute religion in a graduate seminar. I was at the University of Chicago, and I had the great pleasure of studying with Ray Fogelson, scholar of Native traditions. Had a year-long seminar with him, the culmination of which was to be a research paper on a tribe of one's choice, focusing on various kinds of traditions. So various less imaginative peers in the class, no disrespect, Kristen, chose things like Cherokee or Navajo or Lakota to research. I thought, well, that's great, but I'm a Colorado boy, so I had spent some time as a kid visiting various the Ute reservations, and I thought I'd like to learn more about the Utes. And I went to Professor Fogelson, and I told him my intentions, and he sighed, and he said, well, you might want to expand your reach, because the literature is pretty thin. You might include Paiutes, Shoshone, Bannocks, other Great Basins peoples, if you want to have enough literature to work with. Well, I was pretty stubborn. I thought, no, I'm gonna work with what I can find. And so I began to dig through various materials, John Wesley Powell's journals, Julian Stewart's field notes, Omer Stewart's trait lists, what I could find. I was putting together shreds and patches, right, learning a bit about the Sundance, and did have Joseph Jorgensen's remarkable study of that, various aspects of peyote traditions, bear dance, healing traditions, etc. But it was all still bits and pieces, and it wasn't coming together, and I found myself looking at the Hopi aisle in the library and at the Shawnee aisle, thinking surely I could work with something a bit more accessible here. About this time, another professor who knew of my situation said, I've heard that there's a Ute woman working as an intern at the Chicago Field Museum. Maybe you should look her up. Maybe that would help you out. And I thought, wow, there's a notion I hadn't thought of, talk to a human being. So I looked her up, and lo and behold, Becky Hammond, that's who it was. And I invited her over. It turns out she lived not very far away in Chicago. And it was great because here were two Colorado kids stuck in Chicago, miserable with the weather and the landscape, and we really hit it off there. But it was also awkward, an Anglo kid trying to study Ute religion and a Native woman working at a museum of which she was quite critical, to say the least. So our conversation was a bit bumpy, and then I raised an even bumpier topic. I said, so I'm trying to learn about Ute religion. I know that's maybe not my place, but I'm trying. Could you give me some pointers, or what do you know, or what, help me out here. Then I said I pulled out a slim volume I had found earlier in the day called Ute Tales that had been collected and edited by a woman named Anne Smith. And when I found that little volume, I thought, this is the key. Now I have oral traditions. I'm going to read them. It's all going to come together. I will understand Ute religion. Well, many of you know some of these tales. Eye Juggler, Ghost Rob's Dove, Water Babies, etc. Suffice it to say, this clarified nothing for me. I was deeply confused, couldn't begin to make sense of it. It was so foreign to my world. And so I raised it obliquely with Becky. I said, can you help me understand some of these stories? Do you know some of these stories? Oh, yeah. And she just starts laughing. I'm thinking, what? Is she laughing at me? That's okay. I'm goofy, whatever. She says, no, these are funny. You totally missed the point. Some of these, they're profound in different kinds of ways, of course, but these are also humorous. You have to understand why these could be funny and how. And that really opened my eyes to the notion that one has to have a broad human perspective on things like oral traditions to take in their humor, to understand, to ask about context, to really understand the living human situation that could make something like Eye Juggler a funny story. And also the fundamental point of, gee whiz, talk to human beings. If you're going to research something as profound as religion, don't rely on Julian Stewart's field notes that are better than a century old. So as a young student, that was absolutely a pivotal moment really in my career, to which I owe Becky Hammond a debt of gratitude, because it taught me some basic principles in trying to understand other people's traditions. But also, and more specific to this session, after we got done talking about the stories, and she told me her rendition of Ute Dogs, which is just brilliantly funny, and maybe someday you meet Becky and ask her to tell her version of Ute Dogs. We got to talk about other issues. I said, I know it's a sensitive topic, but can you tell me, in a living sense, the living tradition of the Ute Mountain Ute people, what kinds of religious issues are front and center today? And this is back in the early 90s. She said, there's a new federal law, the NAGPRA, and this matters. We're just getting our minds around it, just trying to figure out what this means about getting ritual objects back and about protecting human remains, etc. She said, but this really is capturing my attention. It's capturing a lot of people's attention. And it was basically prophetic. She said, I think a lot of our tribal energies, both of the Utes, but of other tribes, are going to be focused on these kinds of issues for decades to come. Well, here we are 20 years out, and that is absolutely where we are. And as many of you probably know, the Ute tribes, working in conjunction with the state of Colorado, are pushing forward the envelope of the law, what it can do, how it can be effective, its possibilities. And in face of considerable constraints. And so 20 years ago, she pointed me towards that, and that's really become my career, is following repatriation and reburial issues, mostly in Hawaii now, but again, I owe Becky Hammond and her Ute Mountain Ute experiences a debt of gratitude for pointing me in that kind of a direction. In any case, that paper did come to pass with Becky's help, and I'm proud to say that it then became one of the cornerstones for my Native Traditions class that I continue to teach. So for the past 15 years or so, my Native Traditions class has had a modest, but I'd like to think robust, week-long session on mostly Ute histories, but also Ute traditions, and we continue to read Ute tales and puzzle over them, and we've had the occasion to have a number of great visitors, including Ernest House, to the class, and that always makes a great difference. So this is all to say, I continue to be a student of Ute religion and culture, and it's a real honor to be with some of the people who work with this and have worked with this on a daily basis for years and are making an ongoing difference in our understandings and legal understandings of the landscape, the cultural landscape. So with that, let me go ahead and turn things over to our first speaker. This is Mr. Alden Naranjo, and he is a long-term practitioner, cultural practitioner, and a long-term NAGPRA coordinator for his Southern Ute tribe, and has been one of the people at the leading edge of the movement. I remember having heard him speak in 2000 at a conference and was struck by his really powerful grasp of the situation, but also the humor that you were able to bring to a heavy topic that put people at ease. I distinctly remember that, and have always taken that as a lesson on how is it when we are dealing with such things as the dead and violation of the dead, how might we bring a human touch to it where ears get opened rather than closed. And so look forward to hearing more along those lines today. So help me welcome Alden Naranjo, please.
Good morning, y'all. I say you all because I'm Southern Ute. Well, they gave me something here to talk about, and I feel that what I know could help you at all. Maybe. And I think I've forgotten half of what I knew back in 2000.
Me too.
But anyway, our topic is, or my topic, or what I'm supposed to speak about is the Native American Grace Protection and Repatriation Act that was passed in in the last century, 1990. And back during that time, we had started a group years ago. Before that, in the 80s, the college used to call them the Keepers of the Treasures. I don't know if some of you remember that or not, but it's a group of Native Americans that had come together and kind of talked about all the situations that was happening in across Indian country. So as we proceeded with our trying to find things to put together I guess what the government wanted us to do and what we didn't want to do, it was kind of, we're getting to a standstill here. So a miracle happened. The act was passed in 1990. So we were all relieved that we're going to get our remains back. We're going to get our ancestors back. We're going to get some of the funeral objects back. We're going to get all this back without any question, without any hassles or anything like that. That was our belief, but it didn't turn out that way. A lot of the repositories, like the museums, universities, government agencies, refused to let us repatriate our ancestors back so that we could reinterm them in the ground as soon as possible, because some of them had been there for over 50 years, 100 years. And when we asked them about it, they said, well, you know, what we're doing is we're still analyzing these remains and these artifacts that you're asking back. We're still studying them. So our response was, why are you still studying them? You've had them in your vaults, you've had them in your repositories for over 50 years, and you're still doing this? You know? So it wasn't something that we wanted to hear. It was something that, for on the other side, to refuse to repatriate all of our ancestors and all the funeral objects and all the cultural items that was in their possession. So a lot of questions rose up. Who owns these? Where was it found? How was it found? Where is it going to, you know, what's going to happen to them? What is it that we need to do? Is there some hoops that we have to jump through red tape that we have to sign our names down. Our chairman asked us, if there was some way that we could try to move forward as quickly as possible. But we couldn't do that. So one of the things that we asked was if there was some government agency that would, help us with some of the things that we was going through, because NAGPRA at that time was relatively new, and we were being called, up here to Boulder, up to Loveland, different parts of Colorado, for sites that was been discovered, sites that had been discovered, sites that was, that was already cataloged, and we didn't know what to do, because this was something that we had never encountered before. But we persevered, I guess, in one way or another. And one of the first government agencies that had come forward was the Forest Service. And we started working with them. We got all our documents together. We got talking with the Archaeological Society here in Colorado. We got talking with History Colorado, with Denver Art Museum, with Nature and Science, and different museums. So what we were trying to do was trying to put all this, compile all this information together so that we could have some kind of avenue to go through. But at that time there was things that was kind of, I guess, in a way, resistance from the other side. That was back in the last century, in 1990. Up until I retired in 2002, and all this was going on. From 2002 to 2012, I was enjoying my travels, my fishing, sleeping late, getting up, going to sleep late, enjoying all that, drinking coffee whenever I could, whether it was early in the morning or late at night. That was my retirement, be with my family. And the tribe asked me one day, he said, you think you could come back and help us out? I told him, I said, well, maybe. I said, why? He said, well, we need somebody to come up and do some of this work that nobody's doing right now because, and I think that we're getting behind. I told him, well, I'm enjoying myself. I don't want to work. I don't want to do all these things. Well, they keep asking me, so I told him, I said, well, I'll tell you what. I said, I'll give you a year. I'll go help you out for a year, and if that doesn't work, then I'm going to retire. So they approached me again this past January and said, can you give us another year? Well, I told him, I said, well, let me think about it. I don't know what I'm going to do. I said, I don't know whether I'm going to retire or not. I said, that over there, that retirement keeps coming. Come on. So I'm really seriously thinking about that. But as far as the work that we have, we're just like overwhelmed. We have requests from different parts of Colorado. We have requests from different parts of what we used to say was Ute land, basically all of Colorado, parts of Wyoming, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Kansas. That was our domain at one time. That was where we were at. 6 tribes, 6 Colorado tribes. We call them Colorado tribes now, but they were the 6 tribes that was in this part of the country, in what is now Colorado. I guess, we try to say that we're trying to repatriate all the remains that we can, that we know that is Native American. The 2 tribes in Colorado are still trying to do that, still trying to be the lead agencies in trying to repatriate and reintern all the remains that we possibly can from whomever that has those remains or artifacts or whatever that goes with it. We've made contact with the neighboring tribes that we say that was in Colorado at one time, and they gave us an understanding that you people go ahead and take care of it for us. We'll be there, but we won't do the repatriating. You do the repatriating for us. If they give the bodies and if they give the remains and whatever all to you, then we'll come and help you out. That was kind of a gentleman's agreement that we made back in the years, and it still holds today. Now we're going through all this MOUs and PAs and all this stuff that is, I don't know if it's required or not, but we're doing it anyway so that it can be black and white, documented, so that we can have a better understanding of one another, and better understanding with all the agencies and all the museums and universities that we're working with today. So NAGPRA has come a long ways. NAGPRA is one of the things that I really enjoy working with, because it's one of those jobs that it's there. It's a challenge. We have to always, seems like, be on our toes in order to make sure that somebody that has these remains will give it over to us without too much question. And that's been happening. We've buried, I don't know how many people. My little brother Terry Knight has, back in the day, I told him, I said, you're going to have to do all this stuff, and he's been doing it. So he's been doing the reinterment within Colorado for years now, and I told him, you're going to be an old man when you finally finish, and we're getting there. And but NAGPRA is an essential law wherever there may be Native American remains or funerary objects or items of cultural patrimony, or how we may be affiliated with tribes. It's a law that gives us the chance to maybe get all this back. Clear across this country from the East Coast to the West Coast, Canada to Mexico. I always think, how many remains are still out there that needs to be reinterned? How many remains needs to be repatriated so that we as Native Americans that may have cultural affiliations to these remains can feel good? I always think that maybe one of these days, maybe not my lifetime, but maybe my grandkids or my children's lifetime, that all this would be taken care of. Maybe it's a big maybe that we can take care of these things so that we're able to say that we started something, then it's finally coming to an end. We may have to have a lot more MOUs, MOAs, PAs, and whatever that needs to be taken care of. But NAGPRA, to me, is a stepping stone so that we still can communicate with one another. It's a stepping stone that we can still communicate with all the agencies, whether it's state, federal, local. And as far as our tribe, the Ute Nation, Ute people in the state of Colorado, we have a long longevity here. Our presence has been here for many, many years. Pre-1849, pre-1800, pre-1803, when immigrants first come around here, pre-1640 when Coronado made his trek through here. You know, our history in this country is a long, long time that we've been here. We have no migration story. We don't know where we migrated from, if we migrated. We have a feeling that we may be descendants of certain groups of people that were here, whether it's in the Folsom, late Archaic, early Archaic, back to the Paleo times. We feel that we've been here over hundreds of thousands, maybe thousands of years. That's our feeling that we have. That's our story that we have. In the state of Colorado, what is now the state of Colorado. This part of the country, we were here. Other people came, we shared it with them. But today, we have a little strip of land in the southwest part of Colorado. That's the Colorado Utes that's left, the 3 bands. 3 bands were removed because of the Meeker incident. And so we have our old stories of how our people were buried, where they were buried, how they were buried. We have stories like that. So we try to incorporate it into NAGPRA. We try to tell the people, this is how I remember my people saying, this is how and the style that we used to put our people away. But sometimes, you know, there's other entities that come in and said, you know, Utes were never in the eastern part of Colorado. So I said, what? I said, yeah, Utes were never in the eastern part of Colorado. I said, well, I guess we were here, but I always think maybe we weren't here at the same time, you know. But Colorado history to me starts in 1849 or 1848. Colorado history starts then. To me, that's where everybody says, well, you know, after 1849, when the United States government acquired, you know, this part of the country from the Spanish government, you know, this is how our history starts. So we've had flags flying over our land. Get on the north side of Arkansas, we're French citizens. Get on the south side of Arkansas, we're Mexican or Spanish citizens, you know. So it depended upon where we was at. Then again, one time when Texas won their independence, then we became Texans. So maybe that's how come we say y'all. But anyway, that's my spiel on NAGPRA. NAGPRA it's a big subject, and I don't think that anybody can answer all the things that needs to be answered in that subject. So what we need to do is, you know, learn more about it, get it all together, try to get all these things together, but try to repatriate and reintern all our ancestors wherever they might be and wherever we can put them. So we've come to a point where we divided Colorado in 4 sections. All those remains found in the northeastern part are put away here. That's the closest proximity that we can put these remains away, because some of them we don't know. Some of them are, you know, have been found on private land. Some of them have been found in government land. So we're trying to do that. Because a lot of places you can't put them away in the same place, in the same location that they were found. So there's a lot of things that we're trying to do that can make our ancestors feel better, that they could finally continue the journey and get into the next level of eternity, life, whatever. So that's what we're trying to do under this law here that we have today. All the other laws fall into it. All the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, all the other laws goes that, you know, it goes all the way back. So we're trying to put them all together, condense them all together so they can all work for us in doing these things, in doing repatriation, in doing reinternment. If governments that have land, if they'll allow us to put them away there, if private ownerships will allow us to put them away there, if state has land that we could do that, so it's just an ongoing communication that we have with all the agencies that we work with. So we're not having fun, but we're traveling around. It's like we're getting to be, or I'm getting to be a nomad again. Never home. So anyway, that's what I wanted to tell y'all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Naranjo, for those powerful words. Really very much appreciate the way you frame these issues for us. Next, we have Steve Moore, class of '79 from this proud law school, and became a member of the NARF, Native American Rights Fund, core attorney group in 1983. And since that time with NARF has worked on water rights, sacred land issues, religious freedoms, including use of peyote. By the way, I have a 15-year-old high school student who's writing a paper on religious freedom. When I told him you were part of the session, he's like the one-man fan club. He's going to try to make it to lunch to pick your ear. He's like, I couldn't believe it. Has been spearheading NAGPRA-related issues with the Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs, of which he's a member, and a member of the Reinterment Committee. Really another one of the people in this state pushing forward the law, challenging the federal law to live up to its promise, right? Because the legislative promise of NAGPRA was wide and broad and heartfelt by so many people, but the implementation, as Mr. Naranjo has indicated, has been, well, short of that. And some visionary and motivated people in Colorado have said, let's go back to that promise and see if we can get past some of the bureaucratic red tape, past some of the institutional differences to create some new possibilities here. And we're going to hear about possibilities on the horizon. So, welcome.
Thank you, Greg. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here on a Friday morning. Some of you may be skipping class, and that's a worthy endeavor. I think I skipped class in law school as often as I could. Sometimes I was out throwing frisbee out here on a nice spring day like today. As Greg mentioned, I'm a 1979 graduate of the law school. Ellen Roberts spoke yesterday. She's a 1986 grad, and she was telling a bit of humor about how long ago that was. Well, when I describe when I graduated from law school, I say that the earth was still cooling at that time. So it seems like it's that long ago. In many ways, it's also just a blink of an eye, and I think those of you who are law students will probably look back 30 some years later in your career and say, where did it all go? But it's certainly been a fun ride, and working at NARF and with Indian people and Indian tribes has given me wonderful opportunities, and I feel very blessed for the experiences. When I listened to Ernest House yesterday, and I think most of the faces I see today were here yesterday as well, and I listened to Elder Naranjo here, and Alden and I go way back working on these issues and peyote issues. I'm struck by one thing. I'm struck by the human rights aspect of this work. And I think Alden captured it when he said, we have to put things in black and white. We have to put together these MOUs, these agreements, these protocols. That's the white world that we live in and function in as lawyers and as state archaeologists and bureaucrats. Indian people have never seen the need to put these things in writing. As Alden said this morning, we had a gentleman's agreement. They got together with the tribes that have ancestral ties to Colorado, and the agreement was the Utes would take the lead on these human rights things, and they shook on it, and that was enduring. That was all that was necessary from their standpoint. And then, of course, the lawyers and bureaucrats rushed in and had to put all the paper together under state and federal law, and that's for better or for worse the world that we live in today. I guess I've got about 20 minutes to add some elaboration and fill in some of the pieces that Alden did not have time to talk about. Kristen, and thank you for organizing the conference, by the way, and to the dean as well, and for inviting me. Kristen copied the protocol and a map of Colorado with the 3 different regions set out, and if you don't have those, if you haven't picked them up, then please do so today. The protocol is an interesting intersection of federal and state law, and as powerful as NAGPRA is as a federal law, it certainly is in the sense that it reached into the state of Colorado and has a profound effect upon these issues, the human remains and burial offering material issues that are found on state and even private lands. Now, the reason that happened is because NAGPRA requires that the dictates of that law be applied to all museums and institutions that are either federal or receive federal funding. History Colorado, the Colorado Historical Society, receives federal funding. Fort Lewis College receives federal funding. University of Colorado, Colorado State University, on and on and on. And so all of these institutions have an obligation, if they receive federal funding and they have these materials in their collections or might in the future have these materials in their collections, then they have an obligation to follow the dictates of NAGPRA. In Colorado, and I've been fortunate enough to work with and be a member of the Colorado Indian Affairs Commission since the late 90s. And one thing that became apparent to us as commissioners, we would receive quarterly reports from the state archaeologist. And we received these reports that contain a collection of hundreds of human remains at the Historical Society and at other institutions around the state. And we began to ask questions about the nature of these collections. Why does the University of Colorado have this large collection of human remains, right in our backyard here in Boulder? Why Colorado State? Why Fort Lewis College? Why the Denver Art Museum? On and on and on. And how long have they had these collections? And why are they still holding these collections? And what is the nature of the scientific interest in these collections? And I think ultimately, because of people like Alden and Terry Knight, Manuel Hart, Ernest House Sr., I recall vividly those meetings where they would ask these questions of the state archaeologist and her staff. And it really brought to the forefront a clash of paradigms that lies at the root of NAGPRA and why I consider this to be ultimately a human rights issue, because and I don't have time today to talk about the depth of these issues historically and ideologically and philosophically and spiritually. But the clash of paradigms is science versus cultural traditions and respect for human beings on this planet and their beliefs about the dead and their beliefs about who owned the dead and the materials that are buried with the dead. So in Colorado, as we began to ask these questions in the 1990s, and Ernest said it yesterday of Terry Knight. Terry said at one point, well, we have these other intergovernmental agreements with the state of Colorado. We have a clean air agreement, we have water agreements, mineral extraction agreements, agreements dealing with highway safety, on and on and on, Indian child welfare. Why can't we do this in this context? And I think that was Terry pulling the switch that brought the light necessary to bear here, because all along a few bumps in the road. We've had the cooperation and the goodwill of the staff at the History Colorado, the State Archaeologist's Office, Commission of Indian Affairs, the Governor's Office, the Lieutenant Governor's Office. And so the tribes and the Commission, I think working together, we're able to, with the cooperation of these other entities, we're able to begin to look at the limitations of state law, how NAGPRA intersected with state law, as I mentioned earlier, and how we might forge legal documents that reflected the handshake agreement that Alden referred to, that would end once and for all the indefinite and the utterly offensive warehousing of human remains, of Native American human remains here in Colorado. And I want to drop back a minute. I mean, this was part of a larger awakening and growing of consciousness and awareness in the United States about these issues that NARF was involved in, with the National Congress of American Indians, the American Association on Indian Affairs, and others. Back in the 1980s, we really had to fight tooth and nail with some pretty important institutions in this country, including the Smithsonian Institution. NARF was involved in the negotiations in the 1980s with the Smithsonian. And, in my work, and I look out in the audience, other people like Justice Hobbs and John Echohawk, certainly Scott McElroy. I mean, when you're involved in these very complex and difficult negotiations, ultimately you find people on the other side that are people of goodwill, that you establish a relationship, you establish trust, and that light, you try and see that light go on in their minds and in their hearts. And I will tell you, at the Smithsonian, the secretary of the Smithsonian in the 1980s, a guy named Robert McC. Adams, Bob Adams, got it. The meetings that we had with him, and he was being told by his physical anthropologists, these collections are at the heart of the Smithsonian. You cannot allow Indian country to come in here and rip us off, because science is supreme. Science reigns supreme over the hearts and minds and attitudes and beliefs of Native people. And Bob Adams and Suzanne Harjo was involved in those meetings. Bob Adams got it, and he said, this is the right thing to do. We are going to do this. And it led to, in 1989, the passage of the National Museum of the American Indian Act. And we now have the museum on the Mall in Washington, D.C. But part of that act directed that the Smithsonian would begin to repatriate the 17,000 human remains in its collection. Now, they still have collections from all over the world. We couldn't touch those. But they began to repatriate all of those remains to Indian tribes. The work is not done yet. As Alden mentioned, it will go to your children and grandchildren to complete this work. But the clash of paradigms was resolved at that point. A year later, NAGPRA was passed, and that work too began in earnest. I could tell a lot of war stories. I mean, I wanted to tell the one about Bob Adams. We worked at NARF in closing a tourist trap outside of Salina, Kansas, called the Salina Burial Pit. We worked at NARF to rebury over 600 Pawnee ancestors from the Nebraska, at the time we called it, Hysterical Society, aptly named in our mind. We had to litigate issues of common law as to whether, who owned the dead, the remains of the dead. Does a private landowner have superior rights over the remains of the dead on his or her land and the grave offerings found therein, or does the tribe? We litigated and won that case in Louisiana. So there are lots of war stories that I could tell, that John could tell, that Alden could tell, on and on and on. But I think the lesson was that beginning in the 80s, the paradigms began to break down that said science reigns supreme. The protocol that is outside, going back to that now, is a remarkable document. In Colorado, at the same time, I think weeks before NAGPRA was enacted, the Colorado legislature passed a reburial statute that's still on the books today. It states a preference of reburial in situ, in place, if possible. If the landowner objects or if the remains will not be protected, then they can be disinterred and removed. That led to the warehousing of remains, unfortunately. And so we saw, we looked at the 1990 Colorado statute and the limitations of the statute, and the protocol was an effort to, without going to the Colorado legislature, which could have been really problematic, to try and open up that statute. We did talk about it with some legislators, but we didn't want to bring down the wrath of the farming community and the ranching community and land developers and on and on and on. So the protocol was an effort to close what we thought were some loopholes in Colorado law. The two loopholes that I see that were closed in the protocol, what to do about existing collections in the institutions and museums in Colorado where cultural affiliation is not known and can't reasonably be determined, and what to do about this lack of process in the law for how you consult with the 47 tribes that have Aboriginal ties to Colorado. Each and every time there's an inadvertent discovery of a Native American human remain that can't be reburied in place. The Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs and the State Archaeologist's Office, under state law, have to consult with a coroner, and then there's this process that's put in motion. But we didn't want Ernest House and the Archaeologist's Office to have to try and consult with 47 tribes every time a body was found. That led to the consultations funded through a NAGPRA grant that resulted in the protocol. The protocol now clarifies and adds this guidance to the loopholes, closes the loopholes in state law. It establishes the Ute tribes, as Alden mentioned, as the leaders in reburial of remains that are found. It also applies to existing collections, not only newly discovered and inadvertent discoveries of human remains. And importantly, a couple other things. It tightens the time frames within which, if there's any analysis that's going to happen, of the remains by the scientists. It tightens the time frames within which that happens and the time frames within which reburial will occur. And also importantly, it specifies that any physical analysis of these remains will not be destructive. There will not be any DNA samples taken from the remains and the like, so the remains themselves, the bones, will be respected. The document was signed in 2006. The NAGPRA Review Committee met with Colorado and had a few things that they wanted tinkered with the protocol. That was done, and then in 2008, the review committee approved the protocol. And interestingly enough, then in 2010, the NAGPRA Review Committee then promulgated regulations for the repatriation of culturally unaffiliated remains that apply nationwide. Those regulations, in many respects, track the work of this protocol. So Colorado State Archaeologist's Office, the Commission of Indian Affairs, the tribes are really seen, and I think rightfully can claim leadership on this important human rights issue for the entire country and for all tribes and states. And we know that states and tribes are looking at it today in terms of ways to improve their laws and procedures. So I'm happy to answer any questions, Greg, but otherwise, thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you. Well, I fully expect we will have questions for everyone. I think what we'll do is hold those to the end and take them all then. Thank you, Mr. Farr. That was wonderful. The next speaker I have the pleasure of introducing is Peter Ortego, and he is a graduate of this program from 1993 and has spent a legal career working on behalf of those in need in various contexts, but since 2000 has been counsel for the Ute Mountain Ute tribe and has the great pleasure, as we were discussing, of living in that most wonderful part of the state. Love that area. A quick Google search, and it wasn't overly personal, by the way, just informing myself. I do have some questions, but we'll get to those. Turned up just the vast array of kinds of issues that Peter has engaged: water issues, religious issues, tribal management issues, etc. So it's quite clear that as much as you love hiking and biking in that part of the state, you're awfully busy, and that the Ute Mountain Ute tribe is clearly benefiting from your expertise and passion. So please help me to welcome Peter Ortego.
Well, thanks, Greg. That's a really nice introduction. I'm bringing this up here because it makes it look official, and I probably have lots I need to say, but in fact, everything's on this scribbly little piece of paper. But, it's a real honor for me to be here today, looking at the agenda and who you've had speaking here today, and who you're going to have speaking here today, and you've already had, and who you had yesterday. It's a really impressive lineup of folks, and it would have been even more impressive today if Terry Knight had been able to be here. You've heard his name a few times. Unfortunately, he was unable to be here today for this panel, so I was asked to participate on the panel. I'll do my best I'll tell you in a minute sort of what my approach will be to this presentation, but I think you would have heard some really interesting things from Terry. You've already heard his name a few times, and Terry really is a very important person at the Ute Mountain Ute tribe. And he's the director of our Tribal Historic Preservation Office. He's our NAGPRA coordinator. He's also very well spoken. He's a very entertaining speaker, so you're missing out on that for sure. I think he would have been able to give you an impression of how things are at the Ute Mountain Ute Reservation in a way that I certainly would not be able to. His eloquence is quite a bit different than mine. But what I would like to discuss with you today is a little bit about how, as non-Indians, who I came from this law school, I got a very good Indian law education here. I studied under Wilkinson and Getches while I was here, and that was a great honor for me. And so I knew a lot. I felt like I was pretty well prepared to go into Indian country, but there are some things that happened as a non-Indian moving into another culture. And I've seen how the tribe tries to adapt with its values and the things that it cherishes and the things that are important to the tribe and its people, how it tries to both preserve those important values among the dominant culture, the non-Indian culture, but also how they actually educate us, the non-Indians, about things that are important that we don't always think about, we don't always see. There are things out there that I've closed my eyes to. I've learned to not observe. And being at Ute Mountain, my eyes have really been opened up quite a bit to things that I should have seen all my life, but I haven't always been that sensitive to. I know this is an important meeting today, by the way, because Waylon's here, so I figured there must be something going on. I mention that because there are a lot of young Mountain Ute tribal members who are really, I think, exemplifying that merger of the Utes beginning to understand what's happening around them and then being able to capitalize on what's happening, and at the same time being able to inform their people and keep the tribe itself abreast of what's happening in the culture that's surrounding them, but going at it from a unique perspective. My family's Cajun. My father didn't know English until he was about 5 or 6 years old. He was the first one in our family to graduate high school. He went off to college. I was only the second one in our family to ever go to college. Still today, among my cousins and my immediate family, we've only got about 2 or 3 people who've even gone past high school. And yet, I don't know much about the Cajun culture anymore. I'm not really involved with it. I haven't lived in Louisiana for a long time. I don't speak the language. I don't speak any Cajun. Imagine that. My father is the only language he had up until he was about 5 or 6, and I don't know any of it. And that is a real loss. That is a shame that has happened. And I think it's what I'm seeing. You heard earlier about Becky Hammond. What I'm seeing from some of the tribal members is this brilliant way that they're able to not only know their own culture and preserve it and understand it, but also understand the non-Indian culture and what the other tribes are doing and what's happening out there, and to be able to make that a productive relationship. I'd like to be able to bring something positive about Cajun culture to the people I know and the friends I know, and frankly, it just ends up I make a good gumbo. So that's not really saying much, but it's something. And I'm just so impressed with that. And yesterday when I was driving up here from Cortez, I flew by an eagle that was perched on a telephone wire. And later on, as I was driving, when I was going through Del Norte, I saw another one, which I thought was kind of a strange place to see a bald eagle, but there's another one there. And I remembered some of the things that have been told to me from some of the tribal members. And I've learned to be really observant about the animals that I see around me. When I had the pleasure of, I was invited to one of the reburials with Alden not too long ago, and it was a real great experience for me. I think it was a real honor for me to not only be invited, but to be able to witness the ceremony and to be a part of it in my own little way. And I was also observing the animals then, and we had bald eagles show up to that scenario as well. We had deer show up, and they weren't afraid of us. They didn't run away from us. They were interested in what was happening, and they seemed to be watching us. And I've heard that when you have those kind of encounters, it's a good sign. Seeing those eagles yesterday was a positive sign. I've learned that meant it was going to be a good day. It's going to be a good conference. It's going to be a good trip. And I felt that way then. I feel that way now, and I'm sure I'll feel that way on the drive home too. Because we share this universe with all sorts of, we mentioned paradigms earlier, the paradigms that we each bring to our perspective on life. And as I'm moving through these things and learning these things, there's a paradigm that I'm really interested in, and I'm really learning so much from it. There's a good friend of mine, passed away a few years ago, named Carl Knight. It's Terry's brother. And Carl, very, very much like Terry, was a very spiritual man, and he had a lot of connections to the Ute culture, and he was very well spoken as well. He had a lot of very strong feelings about the tribe and what it should be doing and how it should be interacting with the outside environment. And he used to tell me sometimes when he'd come in and talk to me, he'd say that he had heard something on the wind. Sometimes he'd tell me he heard it from the owl. Sometimes he'd tell me it's just something he was thinking about. And I asked him one time whether that was significant. Did it mean something that one thing was from the wind and one thing was from the owl? And honestly, I think he was joking around with me, and he said, yeah, it's very significant. And he went on about it and let me know a few things about what that meant to him. I could tell he was kind of poking fun at me a little bit because, you know, I was taking it so seriously, and I think he was comfortable with it, and he felt at ease with those kind of concepts, and so he was kind of jabbing me in the side a little bit. I learned a lot from him, and when he passed away, he is part of the Ute culture that when a person dies, that their body is handled in a very specific and very careful way, and there are certain individuals, like Terry, for instance, who are capable of doing that type of thing and being involved with someone who has gone to the spirit world. And so when he was at a ranch, and when his wife left that scene, she came across an eagle that was perched, a brown eagle that was perched on a fence post, and she identified that as being Carl, and she talked to that bird, and she had a very deep and moving experience, I'm sure. It's actually kind of hard for me to talk about sometimes because I remember Carl. I remember him saying those kind of things, and that's what would happen. And he was right. And I was at his funeral, and I remember people talking about they saw birds flying around. They saw eagles. I didn't see him. I honestly didn't see him. I looked up in the same place other people were looking, and I couldn't see him. And I've always felt like maybe I lost something. Maybe there's something there that I missed, you know. So I'm still trying to learn. I'm still out there. I'm still trying to figure it out, and I'm still trying to understand what's happening. To the young law students who are here, those of you who may want to pursue a career in Indian law, maybe work for a tribe. I remember I was in your situation many years ago. A few years ago. It's kind of funny. It's actually a long time ago. And I was. A lot of people told me don't do it. You know, it's hard to work for tribes. They're not going to hire you anyway because there's this thing called Indian preference. You know, don't do it. It's really not a good career. I could not object more. I cannot imagine a better job for an attorney than working in Indian law, particularly working for a tribe. It not only gives me a great pleasure to do it, but I have been welcomed. All those nightmare stories I heard about how we wouldn't get the jobs because of the Indian preference, how white lawyers are just not respected, and et cetera, et cetera. It couldn't be further from the truth. The tribes, my experience working with Ute Mountain, I can't speak for all tribes, of course, all tribes are different, but my experience working over there is that people who care, people who want to work with the tribe, no matter whether you're Native American or non-Indian, you will be embraced. Because I think the Ute Mountain Ute tribe has learned that we all have something to offer. We can all bring something to the table. And that's the message I want you guys to know. If you can bring something to that table, if you go to it with your heart open and your eyes open and your mind willing to learn, and yet at the same time to give the benefit of your knowledge and what you understand to whoever your clients are going to be, tribes or not. But if it's tribes, don't be afraid. They will embrace that. They want to work with you. I've found so many really, really intelligent people working at tribes, whether they have law degrees or whether they're engineers or whether they're just citizens of the tribe. There's so much to learn out there, and our cultures can blend in ways that really benefit us all in the long run. I think one of the problems perhaps that we confront over the Ute Mountain Ute tribe, and again I can't speak for others, my experience really is with that tribe, is that it's been an oral tradition tribe, and there's a lot of laws, there are a lot of federal laws that force tribes to put things into writing. And that's not always that easy. You know, the tribes have various levels of sophistication, and I think there are a lot of tribes out there who really have to rely upon other people to be able to put those things in writing for them. When there's a federal law that comes down and says, here's what you have to do, they have to rely on other people to interpret that for them, to tell them what that is, and there has to be a certain level of trust that has to be built up between the people who are representing those new concepts to the tribe and the people at the tribe who have to implement it, or have to make it the law, that the leadership at the tribe. You have to have that kind of developed trust. And I'm going to use the Sex Offender Registry Act for a good example. The tribe has always cared very much about sex offenders on the reservation. It's always tried to protect its people, and there's always been a registry. It's been through the county. It hasn't been through the tribe. But then the feds, without consultation with any tribe, the Congress made a, I say the feds, this is Congress. Congress made a law that tribes either had to make a choice where they would let the states take over all registration on their reservations, which is kind of how it had been, or tribes can take a little bit of sovereign power in the reservations and take that over themselves, do their own registration. Well, what tribe isn't going to do their own? I mean, you put it in that term, of course tribes are going to do their own. That's an exercise of their sovereignty. But you have to put something in writing. The very first step to exercise that sovereignty, other than opting in, as we called it, is you have to have a code. And that code has to look like this. And it has to comply with, it has to answer these jurisdictional questions, and it has to answer these problems of incarceration, and these problems of who can be where and when, and how severe can your code be. Well, the Congress set a minimum level for where the code can be, and tribes can be more strict, but they can't be less strict. Imagine, Ute Mountain, I think, absorbed that fairly well. We went into it as a concept that we could easily embrace. And we put a code together. We're moving in that direction. But that's kind of offensive, that we have to put it in writing, that we're being told we have to. And that's not the only one. There are other codes out there, too, that we have to put in writing. There's a wisdom to not always putting things in writing. There's wisdom to putting it in writing, and there's wisdom to not always putting it in writing. Sometimes the judgment that has to occur, the decisions that have to be made are best done by people who are focusing on the situation at the time, and they're not bound by something which somebody previous to them decided. That person previous to them may not have seen all the answers, may not have seen all the problems that could arise. There's a wisdom to taking things as they come. There's a level of confidence that tribal leaders have. Every day they deal with new problems, every single day, and they have that capacity and that capability. And when they have to now put it in writing, then now they're telling a future council, they're telling the future leaders what they have to do, how they have to answer these problems. Well, those future leaders may not want to do it that way. They're going to have to turn back and change everything that was done because it has to be in writing. Who told them it has to be in writing? Us, the non-Indians, Congress. There are lots of different cultures in Congress. I don't mean to degrade anybody in Congress, but they made these decisions, and they were answering this question for themselves. They weren't answering these questions for the Native Americans. Isn't it interesting that under sequestration they cut funding for all sorts of things, but they didn't cut funding for certain non-Indian health benefits, but they did cut them for the Indian Health Services, which is the one place that the Native Americans go to for their health benefits. Congress wasn't thinking about what's out there. They didn't ask. They didn't go to the tribes and ask them, what should we be doing? When they were doing the Sex Offender Registry Act, they didn't ask tribes, what should we be doing? How should we be handling this problem for you, for the Native Americans within our environment that have a unique culture that we all benefit from. It's interesting. It's not something that we necessarily all grew up with, but when we learn about it and we hear about it, we learn. We see things become open to us that we hadn't seen before. The eagle meant something. That wasn't just a bird sitting on a phone wire. That meant something. There's an identity there. And that's an identity which, if you can grasp it and if you can understand it and you can use it, and you will be a better person for it. That's what I'm trying to learn. I'm the general counsel over there. I'm supposed to know a lot of stuff. I'm supposed to be able to answer all sorts of questions, and I can. But there's a whole slew of questions I can't answer. There's a whole area that I don't even go. When I get ready to deal with certain issues on the reservation, I spot a problem. I go to talk to Terry. I go to talk to Gary Hayes, our chairman who left. I go to talk to Manuel Hart or Juanita, who's on our council. I go to talk to Waylon. I want to know what's going on. Because I can spot the legal issues, When you're out there as a practitioner, I guess one of the things you really have to be careful about when you're representing a tribe, don't assume you know the answers. Don't assume you know the perspective the tribe is going to take. Don't assume that you have the training that's going to give you everything you need to get there. Your training is invaluable. The tribe will utilize it. They will embrace you wholeheartedly. But you need to listen, you need to learn from them, and you need to pay attention to what they're doing. I remember I was at a meeting where there were several tribal members there, and there were several non-tribal members. And there was a real distinct behavior between the way the tribal members behaved and the way this was very early on in my work there. All the non-Indians at this meeting, and there were a lot of BLM folks and Forest Service folks, were like this all the time. They were constantly writing down everything that was being said, but they weren't listening. And yet, the people there who I knew had worked with tribes for a long time, the people who were there who were representatives of the tribes and the tribal members themselves, they were listening. The notes come later. The idea is to be there and pay attention to what's happening and hear what's being said and engage and share in that. When you got to take your notes, take them a little later. If you got to jot down something, remember something, go ahead, but don't write everything down. Don't be engaged. That's the respect that we learn for each other after a while. We don't always have that right out the gate. We don't always all pick up on that right away. But I've learned that. The first time I heard somebody interrupt a tribal member who was speaking, and that tribal member very politely said, I'd like to finish what I have to say before you interrupt me. Isn't that the way we should all be all the time? Well, believe it or not, that is the way it is down there all the time. There's a certain level of respect. There's a certain level of appreciation for individuals and for people and where we come from and who we are that I think sometimes in our busy world, in our 9-to-5, commutes, and we're listening to talk radio all the time, we become disengaged from the people who are right next to us. Well, one thing I've learned is to allow that engagement, allow that intimacy. Don't block it off. That's where you're going to learn so much from the people who you're with. There's one suggestion I want to make that sort of, I hope, wraps all this up to some degree. One of the problems that we're struggling with in Indian country, and it's not just Ute Mountain, this is all tribes, is how they deal with their enrollments. The non-Indians did a really heinous thing, I think, to the tribes back when they started doing these IRA constitutions in the 1940s. Almost every one of those constitutions says that they're going to determine their membership by blood quantum. I'm not aware of any tribe before that determined their membership by blood quantum. And this is just an example. This isn't necessarily how any tribe is going to solve this problem. But I think tribes need to start going back to the feds or the United States and saying, well, that's not how we want to do it anymore. We've got other ways that we want to determine blood quantum. You're seeing tribes out there that go by descendancy, and an adoption, for instance. Why is it that a tribe can adopt somebody, but we still have to honor their blood quantum? In other words, if I want to adopt somebody into the tribe who's not at all of the right blood, his descendants don't get to be members because I adopted him. I now have to adopt all of them if I want them to be part of the tribe. In other words, I have to apply a theory of membership that is counter to blood quantum, but it's the one that I want to apply. Well, I think tribes are going to start moving that way. I think pretty soon you're going to start hearing tribes determine their memberships in ways that the non-Indians are going to think isn't right. No, you can't. I want paternity. I want blood tests. I want people to go to court. I want science to get in the way of this determination. No, tribes are going to make those decisions the way that they feel is best for them and in a way that represents their culture and their heritage. And I think the non-Indians, I'm not saying we should live with it. We need to learn from it. We need to embrace it, and we need to see how that's a culture within our culture which is trying to survive and preserve itself, and we need to help it do that. And for those of you out there, I think every one of you is committed to that, and I have great respect for every one of you for that. Let's help the tribes be who they need to be, preserve their language, preserve their culture. Let's learn from them, give them the benefit of our knowledge to the extent that they need it or they want it, and let's keep that wisdom going for generations and generations. It'd be a shame if we lost it. Well, thank you very much. It's been a real great pleasure to be able to speak with you today.
Thank you, Peter. Your words really ring true for me, for sure. And certainly in Hawaii, where I'm working now, they're struggling a lot with blood quantum issues and thinking about how to bring forward genealogical claims that aren't necessarily about blood, but are about broader cultural connections, and how to push back against federal and state standards for Hawaiianness. So it's happening there too in exciting ways, for sure. A couple of quick things before we turn to questions. I neglected to thank Kristen Carpenter for inviting me and for putting the session together. A lot has been said about her role in the Indian law program here. I just want to add to that and say the university as a whole is benefiting from your presence. People know that we have a lot of different faculty on this campus who work in Native studies in some capacity across history, anthropology, English, you name it. But we haven't harnessed our resources, and we haven't provided opportunities for our students that capitalize on that. And Kristen's been one of the driving forces over the last few years for us to say, University of Colorado at Boulder, we've really got something to offer in this domain, and let's make good on that. And so thank you for that. The next thing is Elder Naranjo, your fellow panelists have asked that if you wish, that you have the last word before we turn it to questions. Did you wish to say anything further at this time? Yes.
Y'all put me in the spot again. Well, I don't know what I can add on. There's they said a lot of some of the things I didn't mention, but I do want to thank the university, the young lady here that put it all together, and all the rest of them that put everything together. Thank you all, and I thank the panelists over here of what they said, and you all have a good day. And thank you, Toleach, that we could come here and Ibero nanamonikan. Nawata nikahani upanaru say sumai kanena. Tiayak. We're going to say can no one of Makachan Watson and put couches sent poop and Murat men and set to Chamawad. We know to poop men put with the send. Which moment get them 80 put out to send. No poop Saman. Why Hanam? The what we have to say. Nuru one. I can know. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, we'll have a few minutes, and I assume we can go a few minutes over since we started late into coffee break if need be, but lots of great issues on the table, and I just want to impress upon us all again how current these issues are. These are unfolding today, and couldn't be more timely. So questions, comments, thoughts for our presenters?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
I always have a question. So I'm curious about NAGPRA. I guess this question is for Steve Moore and also anybody that wants to chime in. And thank you very much for all your presentations. They were very eloquent. But if you were going to make amendments or have some kind of legislation to amend NAGPRA, what would that look like? What would a perfect NAGPRA bill look like?
Yeah.
That assumes a lot about the wisdom and talents of Congress.
Yeah.
But, I think Alden hit the nail on the head when he talked about the generational responsibility now. I think, and part of what Peter was alluding to with sex offender registry is that, and I think the term that we apply nationally is unfunded mandates. And I know tribal attorneys like Monty, he's nodding affirmatively. How does a tribe, somebody said yesterday, I love metaphor, drinking from a fire hose. I mean, so many of these federal mandates come down. There are opportunities for sure, but unless they're followed up with dollars, how do tribes create the institutions and fund the institutions to be able to respond effectively? I mean, the money that is available through the Congress to tribes to set up tribal historic preservation offices is a pittance. And so you have people like Alden, you know, Alden sits in his, tell me if I'm wrong, but he sits in his office and his in-mail consists of, you know, dozens of letters from federal agencies saying, we're planning this pipeline, we're planning this high voltage transmission line, we're doing this road improvement, on and on and on and on and on. And it's Alden, you know. How can he be in 40 places at once, handling all of the NAGPRA responsibilities, the NEPA responsibilities? You know, I think the law works pretty effectively, but tribes just get then overwhelmed. You know, the tribes have been sent the inventories, you know, 15, 20 years ago now, the NAGPRA inventories. But they're still trying to catch up to respond with the inventories and, you know, finding ways to meaningfully engage with the museums that hold their ancestors. So it's now going to take generations to catch up with a groundbreaking law like NAGPRA.
So you don't think that there's other things that could be tweaked, like how much time the institutions have to study human remains, whether there should be a deadline on those studies, and whether there should also be, I know there's a lot of conflicts over, you know, the institutions say, well, we don't know whether these are huge or whether these are, you know, high huge, and so we're going to hold on to them. I mean, to me, it seems like there's been a lot of kind of mincing of tribal affiliation to make it more difficult for the tribes. I mean, would you tinker with any of that?
Well, I think what has been accomplished in Colorado, I think, is an effective approach. And the tribes said ultimately, you know, 47 tribes coming together and speaking with one voice, saying, you know, ultimately, because you, the museum, can't even tell us the provenance of these remains. You can't even, you know, they ended up on your doorstep in a cardboard box in 1924. You don't know, they're identified as Native American, but we don't know where they came from. They might have come from the plains of Missouri. The fact is, they all go back in the ground. They are all respectfully reburied. I mean, I remember one national Native leader saying, we need a tomb of the unknown Native American. And it would be a place where, or like Arlington Cemetery, it would be a place where all of these unaffiliated remains are just reburied. Because ultimately, if you don't have the provenance for those remains, they are of very little scientific value. I mean, and I remember those conversations with the Smithsonian physical anthropologists. You know, the vast majority of their collection, they really didn't have any kind of sufficient context to make an effective analysis of those remains. But they just wanted to hold on to them.
But Steve, does that solve Kennewick Man?
We don't have time today to talk about Kennewick Man.
I'd want to see it apply to private lands, and I'd give it some teeth. I don't know if I'd make it a crime necessarily to violate NAGPRA, but maybe that's how far we need to go to make sure that people actually do what they're supposed to be doing. It's been very difficult to force some of these repositories to comply. They want to, they can see the need to, but like you're saying, there's other pressures as well. I think we need to resolve that problem.
Some of the questions that you're asking is some of the questions that we asked also. You know, and sometimes we feel that we never get the full answer to this. And I don't think we're going to get the full answer to it in this, you know, in our time. It's going to take many people with many answers to finally come together to say that this is where we are at today so that we can go forward and start the reinterment of all the remains that have been in this country, wherever they might be. So it's not gonna be answered today. You're gonna look there and you're gonna say, what was I asking? What do I need to know? I, and the rest of us, can tell you something about NAGPRA, but the rest of it is going to be up to you to find out by looking at documents, looking at the history, looking at not only in the state of Colorado, because it's all over, from the west coast to the east coast. All the remains are all there. Where are they at? Nobody knows, and a lot of it is in the repository. So where and how can you start to find these remains? So, and where are you going to put them? So that's why we're asking federal agencies, you have a piece of land that we can put them, just like you said, maybe like the Arlington Cemetery, but federal agencies are saying we don't have the space. How much land does BLM have? How much land does National Forest have within the state? How much land does a private owner have within the state? And when you ask him, can we do this here? But we're trying to make it possible that these burials is not known to anybody else but the people that participate. Because if we put it on the media, then everybody's going to start saying, well, let's go up there, they might have put something away that maybe we can dig it up and all that. It's already been dug up. It's already been, everything's been, I could go on and on, but we don't want to make any more waves than we have to, but we want to, one of our primary goals is to repatriate our ancestors within the state and reintern them as quickly as possible, without any red tape, without any hassles or anything like that. That's what we're trying to do.
Why don't we take one more question? If someone has one. Yes, please.
Thank you all for your presentations. Sorry, I don't have the mic, but I was wondering how you found the University of Colorado in its various campuses with respect to its receptivity on the repatriation movement, and to the extent that we're developing a critical mass of faculty and students and alumni, if there's anything we can do to be supportive.
Well, I know Sheila Goff is here. I don't want to put Sheila on the spot from History Colorado, but she's been working more directly with CU, I think.
Well, I can speak for our agency, and I can speak a little bit for students that are graduate of CU Boulder. During the time when they were doing consultation at the museum for the human remains that they had in their possession. So let me go back in our case, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we currently have about 10 individuals remaining in our institution. We repatriated, transferred to a burial, close to 800. So we are almost done. And
Well, I think in the interest of time, we'll draw it to a close. Let me say this. We have a coffee break now outside, and then at 10:45, we have the next session on water rights and the Ute tribes. So please stay with us and enjoy the rest of the agenda. Thank you.
Pleasure again.
Really a pleasure to hear your words, and I really want to introduce you to my son. He's here to. He's like, Dad, let me skip school.
Cool. Where does he go to school?
Boulder High.
And he's 15.